The alarm was not supposed to go off. That was the first thing Sorville thought when the red lights flooded the medical bay. The mission was simple. Escort a supply carrier through Sector 9. No hostiles. No threats. Just empty space and a quiet shift. She had been writing notes. She had been drinking her warm kelva broth. She had been completely, perfectly bored. And then the ship screamed. The explosion hit the left corridor like a fist. The whole vessel shook. Sorville grabbed the edge of her desk as the floor tilted. Instruments fell. Glass broke. The broth went everywhere. She heard the crew shouting through the comms. And then she heard something that made her blood run cold. Someone said the human was down. She did not fully understand why that made her move faster. Marcus Hale had been on the ship for 2 months. He was the Galactic Coalition's Terran liaison. One human among 40 alien crew members. He was quiet. He was polite. He ate strange food and made jokes that no one understood, and he always nodded when he passed her in the corridor. She did not know him well. But something in her chest pulled tight. When she heard those words, the human was down. She grabbed her kid and ran. The corridor outside was smoke and chaos. 2 Veil engineers were trying to seal a cracked wall panel. A Savinu soldier was dragging someone away from a sparking console. The lights kept flickering between white and red. Sorville pushed through all of it. She followed the shouts. She followed the sound of boots and panic, and when she turned the corner into the secondary loading bay, she stopped. She stopped because what she saw did not make sense. The bulkhead had come loose. It was a massive slab of reinforced hull plating roughly the size of a transport door, and it had swung down during the blast and hit Marcus Hale directly. He was pinned against the far wall. The metal was across his left side, his left arm, his ribs, his hip. There was blood on the floor. Not a little blood, a lot of blood. Dark and spreading slow across the gray metal floor like something spilled from a broken bottle. 3 crew members were already there. Kalavos, the dork surgeon, was on his knees trying to get a reading from a scanner. Yima, a young Veil medic, was pressed against the wall with her hands over her mouth. A Sifinu engineer named Greth was trying to lift the bulkhead plate and failing completely because it weighed close to 400 units. None of them were calm. Sorville stepped forward. Her training kicked in. She opened her scanner and pointed it at the human, and the numbers that came back made her pause for just a moment. Just one moment. Then she forced herself to move again. Fractured ribs. 4 of them. Maybe 5. Left arm broken in 2 places. Deep lacerations across the torso from the edge of the plate. Internal bleeding. Possible damage to lower organs. And blood pressure that was dropping slow but steady, like water leaking from a cracked tank. It was bad. By Veil medical standards, it was not just bad. It was fatal. A Veil with these injuries would already be unconscious. Their nervous system would have shut non-essential functions down. Their body would be preparing to stop. That was how Veil biology worked. The body accepted the end and began to say goodbye. So when Marcus Hale turned his head and looked at her, she made a sound she was not proud of. He was conscious, not just conscious. His eyes were clear. His jaw was tight, and there was sweat on his face, and the lines around his eyes said he was in pain. Yes, enormous pain, but he was looking at her like he was waiting for her to do something useful. Greth, get this plate off him, Sorville said. I cannot move it alone, Greth said. It is too heavy. Then get someone to help you, Sorville said. Now, she dropped to her knees next to Marcus. She pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck. His pulse was there, fast, uneven, but there. Hey, Doc, Marcus said. His voice was rough, dry, like gravel at the bottom of a dry river. But it was a voice. He was using it. He was making words. Do not speak, Sorville told him. Save your energy. He almost smiled. Just the corner of his mouth. Just a little kind of hard not to, he said. She looked at the scanner again. The blood loss number had gone up. She pressed a compression seal against the largest wound on his side, and he made a short, sharp sound through his teeth, but he did not scream. She had treated Vale soldiers who screamed at a tenth of this. She had treated Dork officers who went unconscious from the shock of a broken bone. This human was making small sounds and looking at the ceiling. Cathevos came close to her ear. Doctor, he said quietly, his organs are compromised. The internal bleeding alone. Even if we move him now, even if surgery is perfect. She knew what he was not saying. She looked at Marcus again. He had his eyes on the ceiling. His right hand was flat on the floor next to him. His fingers were pressing into the metal like he was holding on to something that was not there. Holly, she said. Marcus, look at me. He looked at her. How bad, she asked. She did not know why she asked. She always told patients. She never asked them. But something about his eyes made her ask. He was quiet for a second. He took one careful breath. Then another. Bad enough, he said. But I have had worse. Greth came back with 2 others. They got the plate off. Marcus did not pass out when they moved it. He made that sound again through his teeth. He gripped the floor. But he stayed conscious, and when they got the stretcher under him, he looked up at Sorville one more time. You're good at your job, right? He said. Yes. She said. Good, he said. Because I would really like to not die today. She wanted to say something reassuring, something calm and professional. Instead, she found herself saying the truth. Then help me, she said. Stay awake. Stay with me. He nodded. And as they rushed him through the corridor toward the surgical bay, Sorville looked down at her scanner one more time. The numbers were still terrible. The blood loss was still climbing. Everything about this situation said it was already over. But the human was still awake. His eyes were open, and his jaw was set and something in the way. His breath told her he was not done. Something stubborn and old and deeply strange was holding him here. Not medicine. Not luck. Just will. She had never seen anything like it in her life. She ran faster. The surgical bay was cold and bright and very loud. Not loud with voices. Loud with machines. The monitors beeped. The pressure seals hissed. The overhead lights hummed at a frequency that Sorville had never liked, but had learned to ignore over 20 years of medicine. She stood at the table with her hands already gloved and her eyes already moving, and Cathevos was on the other side doing the same. Marcus was on the table. He was still awake. That was the part that kept pulling at her attention. She had given him the standard Vale sedative. Not a small dose either. A full dose. The kind that put a grown Dork soldier into deep unconscious sleep for 6 hours. The kind that made even a Sithanu feel slow and far away. Marcus blinked. He looked at the ceiling. His breathing changed a little. He got quieter. But he did not go under. His eyes stayed open. Cathevos noticed it too. He said nothing for a moment. Then he looked at her across the table, and she could see the question in his eyes. She gave him a small shake of her head. She did not have an answer. Not yet. She began the first procedure. The internal bleeding was the most dangerous thing. If she did not stop it in the next few minutes, the rest of the surgery would not matter. She worked fast. She worked clean. She had done this 100 times on 100 patients. And her hands knew what to do even. When her mind was asking questions, it could not answer. Cathevos, meanwhile, was doing something else. He had pulled up the Terran medical database on the side screen. The Coalition had given every medical officer a file on human biology when the Terran liaison program began. Most of them had looked at it once and filed it away. Kethevus had looked at it once and filed it away. Now he was reading it again with very different eyes. He was reading it like it was something that might explain what was happening on his surgical table. Sorville heard him make a sound. A low sound. The Doric equivalent of surprise. What she asked. She did not look up from the procedure. "Their bones," he said slowly. "Humans. Their bones. When broken, they begin to repair themselves almost immediately. The body treats fractures as an emergency event and starts sending resources to the site. Within minutes. All species do that," she said. "Not like this," he said. "Not this fast. And not while still conscious. And not while also managing this level of blood loss at the same time." She said nothing. She kept working. A few minutes passed. Then he made the sound again. "What now?" she said. He did not answer right away. She glanced over. He was staring at the screen. His 4 fingers were very still on the edge of the console. "Kethevus," she said. He turned to her slowly. "There is a case here," he said. "A human, 3 years ago, on a colony mining station. The man was struck in the head with a pressurized tool. The strike fractured his skull in 2 places and caused bleeding in the brain. She waited. He drove a vehicle 14 kilometers back to the medical station," he said. "Alone. He drove himself, with a fractured skull and brain bleeding. And when he arrived, he told the medic on duty that his head felt a bit heavy. The room was quiet for a moment except for the machines. That is not possible," she said. "It is in the file." He sighed. She turned back to her patient. Marcus was still looking at the ceiling. His jaw was still tight. His right hand had found the edge of the table and was holding it. Not in a desperate way, just holding it. Like a man sitting on a wall watching the sun go down. She checked the internal bleeding. The first seal had held. Good. She moved to the second. "Tell me something," Kethevus said from across the table. He was still reading. What she said. "How many things does the human body do at one time?" she asked. "Right now, in this moment, while it is broken." She knew the anatomy. She began listing in her head. Fighting blood loss, managing shock, beginning fracture repair, processing pain signals, maintaining consciousness, regulating temperature, producing clotting agents. "Too many," she said. "Yes," he said. By Vale standards, a body this injured should be choosing what to keep running and what to shut down, prioritizing, conserving. And instead, she said. And instead his body is doing everything at once, he said. Like it does not know how to stop. Like it has never learned. How? There was something in that sentence that sat strange in her chest. Like it has never learned how. She looked at Marcus again. He had turned his head slightly. He was looking at the ceiling in a different spot now. Like he was reading something written up there that no one else could see. His lips moved just a little. Just once. She thought he might be counting. Or praying. Or something in between. His blood pressure had dropped again. Not badly, but enough to notice. Stay with me, she said out loud. He turned his head toward her voice. Still here, he said. His voice was slower now. The sedative was doing something at least. Making the words come out thick and careful. Good, she said. She went back to work. 3 minutes passed. Then he spoke again. Did I ever tell you about the bar on Callus? Station, he said. She blinked. You are talking to me right now, she said. Seemed rude not to. He sighed. Kethevus stopped reading. You are in surgery, she said. You have 4 broken ribs and internal bleeding and a broken arm. And yeah, he said. His voice was almost soft. I know, I can feel it. But talking keeps me here, keeps me present. So he paused. His hand tightened on the table edge. Loosened. There was this fight, he said. Mining colony. Guy hit me with a plasma wrench. Right here. He almost lifted his left arm but caught himself. Ribs. Felt something crack. Drove the rover back to base. 14 clicks. Cathvos made a very small sound. Marcus did not notice. He kept talking. His voice was slow and strange and honest. It hurt, he said. I'm not going to lie. It hurt a lot, but I had a job to finish. So I finished it. And then I went to the medic. And he said to me, "Son, how are you even standing?" And I said, He stopped. What did you say? She asked. She did not mean to ask. It came out by itself. I said, I have seen worse. He said, The monitors beeped steady in the silence. Cathvos looked at her across the table. His eyes were wide. For a dork, that was the equivalent of standing on a table and shouting. She turned back to the surgery. Her hands kept moving, clean and sure and fast. But her mind was doing something else, turning that sentence over and over. I have seen worse. Not I am fine. Not I am strong. Not I am not afraid. I have seen worse. Like pain was not something to be defeated. Like it was just something to be compared, measured against other pain. Filed and noted, and then set aside. She had spent 20 years treating trauma. She had treated soldiers and miners and victims of disaster. She had seen bravery. She had seen people push through things they should not have survived. But she had never heard anyone speak about their own broken body the way Marcus Hale spoke about his. Not with pride. Not with performance. Just quiet, plain, simple honesty, like it was a fact about the world. Like the sky being a certain color. She finished the second seal. The bleeding stopped. She exhaled. Just once. Quick and controlled. Good, she told herself. Good. Now keep going. And somewhere behind her she heard Cathvos very quietly add a new classification note to the Terran medical file. She did not ask what it said. She already had a feeling she knew. The ship was still being hit. Sorfal could feel it through the floor. Small tremors. Distant. Like a far-off storm you could feel in your feet before you could hear it in your ears. The raider ships had not given up. The battle was still going outside those walls. But inside the surgical bay, everything was very focused. And very still and very quiet except for the machines and the breathing of the two people working and the one person on the table. The arm was the hard part. 2 breaks. In the same bone at different angles meant she had to be careful. She had to go slow. She could not rush this part or the bone would heal wrong, and then the rest of it would not matter much. She asked Cathvos to hold a position, and he did. They worked without talking for a while. Marcus had gone quiet, too. That worried her more than his talking had. She checked his eyes. Still open. Good. His pulse was still there. Unsteady but present. His color was not good, but it was not getting worse. The sedative was holding him at the edge of sleep, but not pulling him under. And she was starting to understand that maybe his body simply would not allow it. Maybe being unconscious felt too much like surrender and something deep in him. Refused. She finished the first part of the arm procedure. Then, without meaning to, she asked the question that had been sitting at the back of her throat for an hour. Does it not hurt? She said. He turned his head toward her. He had been staring at the ceiling again. Those quiet eyes came down and found her face. Does what not hurt? He said. All of it, she said. She kept her hands moving. She did not look at him while she said it. All of this. You are awake. You can feel this. You have been awake since the corridor. A veil patient in your condition would have shut down. The body would have made the choice. But you are here, and you are talking to me, and I need to understand. There was a silence. Long enough that she thought maybe he would not answer. Then he spoke. It hurts. He said simply, yeah, it really hurts. And why she started. Because it is just pain, he said. She looked up at him then. She could not help it. He was watching the ceiling again. His jaw was still tight. His right hand was still gripping the edge of the table, but loosely now. Like habit, not necessity. Pain is just a message, he said. Your body's sending you information, saying, hey, this is broken. This is wrong. You should know about this. She waited. He took a slow breath. But you do not have to do what the message says, he said. You can hear it, understand it, and then decide what to do. And sometimes what you decide is, okay, I hear you. I know, but I'm not done yet. So I am going to keep going, and we will deal with this when I have time. She did not respond for a moment. She finished a suture. Started the next. Where did you learn that? She asked. He almost laughed. It was not a full laugh. Too much effort. But the shape of it was there. Earth, he said. She waited again. You know about Earth, he said. I know what is in the file, she said. The file does not cover much, he said. Not really? Not what it was actually like. She glanced at the monitor. His pulse had steadied slightly. Good. Keep him talking. Keep him present. Tell me then, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Like he was thinking about where to start. We had a planet that was trying to kill us, he said. From the beginning. Big predators. Disease. Ice that covered everything for thousands of years. Volcanoes. Floods. We did not have hard shells or fast legs or extra limbs or better eyes. We had nothing special. Just our brains and our stubbornness. She kept working. Listening. And we fought each other, he said. A lot. Wars. Big ones. Wars that killed millions. Plagues that killed even more. There was a sickness once that killed maybe 100 million people in less than 2 years. Maybe more. The records from that time are not complete. That is not possible, she said. One sickness. Yeah, he said quietly. It is in the history books. We lived through it. Kept going. Built cities after. Had children. Planted crops. Got up the next day. She could not think of anything to say. And we did not get softer after that, he said. We got harder. Not mean. Not cruel. Just harder in the way that things get hard when they survive enough. Like wood left in the weather long enough. It gets dense, heavy, difficult to break. She thought about that. She thought about Vale history. Her own people. They had built their civilization slowly, carefully. They had avoided war through diplomacy for 800 years. They were good healers because they were gentle people in a gentle history. The worst things in Vale memory were distant things. Old things. Things in books. She began to think that maybe that was a very different kind of history. A very different kind of making. We had people, she heard him say. His voice was slower now. The drugs were pulling a little harder. I mean, we still have people. But in the old days, people who walked into burning buildings to pull strangers out. People who stood in front of armies alone. People who sat with the sick and dying when everyone else ran. Not because they were told to. Not because the rules said so. Just because they could not stand the idea of not doing it. She checked the arm. Progress. Good. And those people, she said softly. Were they afraid? Yeah, he said. He said it like it was obvious. Like she had asked if water was wet. Of course they were afraid. Fear is not the problem. Fear is just another message. You hear it. You understand it. And then you decide what to do with it. She stopped moving for just a second. Just 1 second. Then she went back to work. She had been wrong about something. She had been wrong for 2 months. She had looked at Marcus Hale and seen a small, soft creature in a big, strange universe. She had been polite to him the way you are polite to something fragile. Something that needed protecting. Something temporary and a little sad. She had been so completely wrong. He was not here. Despite being human, he was here because of it. Every broken thing in his history. Every plague and war and long dark winter. Every generation that stood up after being knocked down. Every person who ever said, "I hear you, and I am not done yet." All of it had made this man on her table, holding the edge, staying present, speaking plainly about pain like it was a neighbor he had known too long to be impressed by. She felt something move in her chest, something she did not have a clinical word for. "You are going to be all right," she said. That it was not a professional assessment. It was not something she could prove in that moment. The surgery was not finished. The numbers were still difficult, but she said it anyway. And she meant it. He made a small sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a word. Somewhere between the two. "Yeah," he said. "I know." Like it had never been a question. Like the only real question had been whether she knew it yet. Outside, the ship shook once more. The lights flickered. One of the monitors beeped a warning, and then settled Dodd. She kept working Dodd, and for the first time in the whole long, terrible hour, she was not afraid for him. She was just working, side by side with something she was only beginning to understand. Something old and hard and deeply strange and alive. Something human. Word travels on a ship the way water travels through cracks. You do not see it moving. You do not hear it moving. But it gets everywhere. By the time the battle ended and the raider ships had retreated and the crew of the Undying Mercy had begun counting their damage and their wounded and their loss, the word had already reached every corner of every deck. The human should have died. The human did not die. That was the whole sentence. That was all anyone said. But the way they said it was different for everyone. Some said it like it was a medical curiosity. Some said it the way you say something you do not quite believe, even though you saw it yourself. And some said it very quietly in the dark, when they thought no one was listening, like they were still trying to fit it inside their understanding of the world and finding that it would not quite go. Yimla was the young Vale medic who had been in the corridor when they found Marcus. She was 23 years old. She had graduated from the Coalition Medical Institute the previous year. She had never been in a real emergency before. Not a real one. Not one with blood on the floor and a person looking at you with clear eyes from underneath. 400 units of metal dot. She did not sleep that night. She sat in the small chair beside the recovery monitoring station, and she watched his vitals on the screen, and she wrote in her personal log. She wrote for hours. She wrote about what his blood pressure had been when they found him and what it should have been. She wrote about the rate of his clotting and how it compared to standard Vale recovery. She wrote about how he had spoken to her in the corridor when they moved the plate. He had said something to her. In the middle of being lifted onto the stretcher with a broken arm and bleeding ribs, he had noticed her face. He had said, "Hey, you are doing great. Keep going." He had said that to her. She wrote it down. Then she wrote it down again on a different page because she wanted to make sure she had it exactly right. She ended up with 40 pages of notes before morning. She titled them simply, "The Human." On the other side of the ship, in the lower engineering deck, the Sthenu soldier Greth was not writing anything. He was sitting on a crate in the equipment bay, turning a metal coupling over and over in his four-fingered hands. He had fought in 2 battles before this one. He had been trained in Sthenu Military Academy for 6 years. He knew what fear looked like. He knew what courage looked like. He thought he had seen most versions of both in the corridor when the plate came down. Greth had been the first person to reach Marcus. He had grabbed the edge of that plate and pulled with everything he had, and it had not moved. Not even a little. He was Sthenu. He was strong in the way that his species was built to be strong. And the plate had not moved, and the whole time he was failing to move it. Marcus had been looking at him from underneath it, not with panic, not with the wide animal eyes of someone who understood they might be dying. It was something else, something still and focused and waiting, like a soldier who has assessed the situation and is waiting for the situation to change. That look. Greth turned the coupling over again. He had served with soldiers from 12 different species. He had never seen that look before. He thought about it now in the dark of the equipment bay, and he decided that when Marcus was well enough, he wanted to ask him about it. Not as a medical question, not as a curiosity, as one soldier asking another in the command deck. Admiral Ythris sat alone. He was the oldest member of the crew. He was Dork, 140 years old, and he had commanded vessels for 90 of them. He had a face like the surface of an old moon, and eyes that had seen things that would make younger people stop eating for a week. He did not speak often. When he spoke, people listened, not because he was in command, but because he had never once in 90 years said something that was not worth hearing. He had reviewed the medical logs privately. He had sat with them for a long time. The scanner data from the corridor, the surgical notes, Cathavis's updated file entries, Yimla's 40 pages which she had formally submitted as a crew, medical report the morning. He had read all of it. Then he had opened the crew record from Marcus Hale, the official log, the place where significant events and assessments were entered and kept. Permanently, he had sat looking at the blank entry field for a while. Then he typed 8 words. Do not underestimate the Terran. He closed the log. He stood up. He looked out the command window at the stars for a while. Then he sent a short, personal message to the Galactic Coalition Command. It said that in his assessment, the Terran liaison program should be expanded. He did not give reasons. Ythris never gave reasons. He felt that if someone needed reasons, they were probably not the right person to be receiving the message. In the medical research office, Kethavas was working. He had not slept either, but that was not unusual for him. He was Dork. They slept in short, efficient cycles and never felt guilty about skipping one if something interesting was happening. And something very interesting was happening. He had been in correspondence with the Galactic Medical Institute since early morning. He had submitted a formal reclassification request for the human species in the Coalition Medical Registry. The current classification was Category 3, Fragile Biped. It was the same category as the Lethavine, a small, gentle species from the outer systems who bruised when the temperature dropped too fast. He found this classification so wrong that it almost made him feel something. He had proposed Category 7, Extreme Resilience, with a secondary note that read, Handle with respect. The Institute had sent back 3 responses asking him to confirm he was serious. He had confirmed 3 times. He was currently writing a full paper, 48 hours of data, surgical records, physiological comparison tables, historical notes pulled from human archives about people who had survived things that should not have been survivable. There was a man who fell from a great height and walked away. There was a woman who was stung by many of the most venomous creatures on their planet at once and refused to stop breathing. There were soldiers who had continued fighting with injuries that by any biology should have ended the fight long ago. He did not write the paper with admiration. Admiration was not a Dork thing. He wrote it with the careful, precise focus of someone who has found a fact that changes a large number of other facts and understands that the work of updating those other facts is going to take a very long time. But in the last line of the paper, he allowed himself one sentence that was not clinical. He wrote, In 20 years of surgery, I have never encountered a patient who made me feel that the table was unnecessary. Then he deleted it. Then he put it back. Then he left it. And across the ship in the soft dim light of the recovery ward, Marcus Hale was asleep. Finally properly asleep. Not the strange half-conscious state of the surgical table. Real sleep. Deep and quiet. His monitors showed steady lines. His pulse was slow and even. His color had come back in the night, and he looked smaller somehow in sleep. Less like the thing they had all been quietly amazed by, and more like just a person. Tired and patched up and resting. Sorfiel stood in the doorway. She had come to check the monitors. Just a check. Just a minute. But she stood there longer than a minute. She stood there looking at this man who had come on to her. Shipped 2 months ago and eaten strange food and made bad jokes and nodded at her in corridors, and she thought about everything she had learned in one night. She thought about a species built in hard weather. She thought about a planet that tried to kill them and failed. She thought about all the small human hands that had reached into dark and burning places throughout history because they could not stand the idea of not reaching. She thought about him looking at her from underneath a metal plate saying you are good at your job, right? She turned off the light and let him sleep. Tomorrow would be different. She already knew it. How she saw him. How she saw all of them. She would never again look at the word human in a file and think fragile. She would never again think temporary. She would never again feel politely sad about their short lives and their small, soft bodies. She walked back down the corridor. Behind her, the monitors beeped soft and steady. The human slept, and the ship moved on through the stars. 2 days after the surgery, Marcus Hale was sitting up and asking for food. Not the soft recovery broth that Sorfiel had left at his bedside. Real food. Solid food. Something with protein in it. He said it cheerfully, like it was a completely reasonable request. Like he had not been on a surgical table 48 hours ago with 4 broken ribs and internal bleeding and a broken arm and enough blood on the floor to make a vial. Medic fill 40 pages with notes. Sorfiel looked at his scan results that morning for a long time. The fractures were not healed. That would take more time. But the internal repairs were clean. The blood levels were recovering. The tissue was closing in a way that her textbooks described as taking 3 weeks minimum and was apparently taking his body roughly 2 days to decide. It was mostly done with. She approved the food request. She told herself it was a clinical decision. She stood in the corridor outside the recovery ward for a moment after that. She had been carrying something around since the night of the surgery. A weight. A question that kept moving around inside her chest and would not sit still. She had been trying to decide what to do with it. She decided. She walked into the recovery ward. Marcus had his eyes open and was looking out the small porthole window beside his bed. The stars outside were very still. The ship was in slow drift. After a battle, the crew took quiet when they could find it. He turned when he heard her steps, and that corner of the mouth movement that was not quite a smile appeared on his face. "Doc," he said. She sat down in the chair beside the bed. Not at the foot of the bed. Not standing over him with a scanner. She sat in the chair like a person who had something to say, and had decided to say it sitting down. He watched her, waiting. "I owe you something," she said. He raised one eyebrow. Just a little. It moved the lines on his forehead. "I have been on this ship for many years," she said. "I have treated many patients, many species. I thought I understood what the body was capable of, what people were capable of. I had a very clear picture of the galaxy and the things in it, and where everything belonged in that picture." She paused. "I was wrong about you," she said. "I was wrong about all of you. From the beginning. When you came on board, I thought, there is a fragile thing. Here is something small in a very large universe. I was polite to you the way you are polite to something you feel a little sorry for." Marcus said nothing. He was listening, and now she said, I have read everything I can find. About your history. About your planet. About the things your species has lived through. And I find that I am sitting here, and I cannot find the right words for what I think, which is unusual for me. I usually have words. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, What did you read? She told him. The plagues. The wars. The ice. The things people had survived that should not have been survivable. The long grinding history of a species that kept getting back up. She told him about the man who drove 14 kilometers with a fractured skull, and she watched his face, and he did not look surprised. And that was interesting to her. You knew about that, she said. He nodded. Something like that, he said. Yeah, there are a lot of stories like that, how she said. How does a species that goes through all of that not just stop? How do you not decide at some point that it is too much? He was quiet for a little while. Outside the porthole, a small cluster of stars sat very still in the dark. Then he said, Have you ever broken something? Not a patient. Yourself. Something of yours. She thought about it. Yes, she said. Years ago, I dropped my mother's reading glass. A very old one. It broke. What did you do? He said. She paused. She had not thought about that in a long time. I was sad, she said. For a while. And then I found the pieces. And I tried to repair it. The repair was not perfect. You could see where it had broken. But it worked again. He nodded slowly. That is it, he said. That is the whole answer. You find the pieces. The repair is not perfect. You can see where it broke. But it works again. And the next time something breaks, you already know you can fix it. Because you did it before. She looked at him. He looked back at her. No performance in his eyes. No pride. Just the plain flat truth of it. Your species has been breaking and repairing for so long, she said slowly, that you have forgotten it is supposed to be impossible. He thought about that for a moment. I do not think we ever thought it was impossible, he said. I think we just thought it was Tuesday. She looked at him for a long moment. Then something happened that surprised her. She made a sound. A short sound. It was not quite a laugh. Vale did not laugh the way humans did. But it was the shape of one. The feeling of one. He seemed to understand it because his mouth made that movement again. More of it this time. Almost a real smile. Then he looked back out the porthole. You asked me something, she said. In the corridor. Before surgery. You asked me if I was good at my job. Yeah, he said. Why, she asked. You were injured. You were bleeding. You had other things to think about. Why did that matter to you? He was quiet for a moment. Because I was putting my life in your hands, he said simply. And I wanted to know who was holding it. I was not asking you to be perfect. I was not asking you to promise anything. I just wanted to know if you took it seriously. If you cared. She felt the weight in her chest shift. And did you know, she said. When I answered. Did you know from my answer? He turned to look at her. Those steady eyes. Yeah, he said. I knew. She did not ask how. She thought she understood. You did not survive the things humans had survived without getting very good at reading people. And knowing in half a second who would hold and who would run. Who meant what they said. She stood up. She picked up the scanner from habit and then put it back down. She did not need it right now. There is something I want to put in the medical bay, she said. A line. Just one line. So that I see it every day. I wanted to ask if that was all right with you. He looked at her with something close to curiosity. What line, she said. She told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once. Like it was a small thing. Like it was obvious. She walked back to the medical bay. She stood at her terminal. She thought about 20 years of medicine. She thought about everything she thought she knew and all the ways one night had rearranged it. She thought about a planet in the dark that tried to kill everything on it for 1,000,000 years and instead made something that looked at the rest of the universe and said it looks pretty manageable. She typed 4 words on a small card and fixed it to the wall above her terminal where she would see it every single morning when she came in to begin her work. It said, "I have seen worse." She stood back and looked at it. Not a battle cry, not a boast, not a declaration of power or strength or invincibility. Just a fact. A quiet, plain, true fact about what it meant to be human. To have the history they had. To carry all of it and still show up. Still reach. Still look at a broken galaxy and say, "I know. I hear you. But I am not done yet." She had spent 2 months feeling sorry for Marcus Hale. She would not make that mistake again. She turned off the light. She walked out. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere deep in the ship she could hear the low hum of the engines, carrying them all forward through the dark. And in the recovery ward at the end of the hall, a man who should have died sat up and watched the stars and ate his food and was not afraid and had never been afraid and would not be afraid because he had seen worse. They all had, and they were still here.